I was using the clicker. It didn't work at all. Let's see if we can improve that even further and see if it works. It works! Okay. We've been in this series called Better Than You Imagine, and we've been asking a single question: what is it like to follow Jesus? It's somehow even better than we could possibly imagine. And partly because I can't even remember really what I said last time, but also because it might be helpful to walk through where we've been in this series. I like to go through some of the main ideas that we've been through. The first week we asked, what does it feel like to follow Jesus? One of the things we saw there was Jesus knew something about the world, that it was God-saturated, that God's presence was in fact everywhere. If we learned or were formed into people who could feel that presence, then it would feel spacious. How does it feel to step into the presence of God? It feels spacious, expansive. What do we get the next week when we step into God's presence on the regular, when we train our minds to be focused on Jesus, when we say, I'm going to wake up every day and try to live in the presence of God? What do we get? We get Jesus as our teacher. One of the things he has to teach us is very specific to you and me, that you have a unique story, unique psychology, unlike anyone who has ever lived, and Jesus knows all of it, and therefore he has very specific and unique things to teach only you about being your best self. Part of what he has to teach you is real specific, and part of it is powerfully universal, that you are deeply loved, that is the truest thing about you. The next week we were taking a look at how do we do the very best things in our lives. There's an old saying that nothing gets through to a human being like pain or beauty, and sometimes we can really dial into the presence of God when we really need him, when we're in pain, or when we've experienced this amazing gratitude. But what about the good things right in the middle? We call them glimmers. It's the opposite of a trigger. A trigger takes you to a painful place all of a sudden. A glimmer takes you to a wonderful place all of a sudden. We saw that's how Jesus was using the sacraments, that the bread wasn't just bread, it was this window to a whole new reality about the satisfying presence and work of God. So all the things that are good in our lives, we can view them as this gateway into who God really is. That every good thing that happens to you is a doorway into the heart of God. We saw that he was the good Father who gives all gifts that come from above. Today we're going to talk about what are we, and this is not really like a metaphysical question, what are you made out of? It's more like functional. What is the thing you are best designed to be doing in the world? And then I want to give you a heads up. Next week we are going to do what I hope is an annual tradition, when we talk about what do we do with the very most painful things in our life. And I've checked with the Elks Lodge. There's no events there, so it'll be nice and quiet. And what I want to ask you to do is to choose a painful part of your life, and maybe even to bring an artifact of that painful reality. And we're going to offer those real humbly, real quietly, real personally to God. We're going to spend some time grieving together. Turns out our world really is not equipped well to grieve, and therefore we all carry painful, ungrieved things with us. We don't have to carry those burdens. Some of those things might always hurt. They don't have to feel so heavy when we share them with God. So we're going to do that together. In fact, I'm going to tell the story of my niece, who passed away when she was 4 years old. And wildly today would have been her 10th birthday. She was born on St. Patrick's Day. So next week, I'm going to wear the shirt that I have that commemorates her. I'm going to tell that story, and we're going to feel some of the painful realities of being a human being. And we're going to see part of what Jesus intends for us is to live every moment, every aspect of our lives. All the good, amazing stuff. All the wild, magical, beautiful stuff. Also all the very most painful parts too. So a week's warning, some homework, come with something in mind. Maybe even an artifact to say, is it a relationship or a missed opportunity or an injury or a family circumstance that feels heavy to you, and we'll offer those heavy things to God. But for now, I want to talk, what are we? Some sermons take on an identity that are like a lot of stories. That's maybe how next week will be a little bit. This one is a little bit more of a deeper dive into a specific passage that you might be intimately familiar with. Or maybe it'll be your first time and never heard it before in your life. But we're going to see some of Jesus' favorite parts of the Old Testament really tell us how are we supposed to function in our lives. What is the function of my life and your life? Here's the passage we're going to jump into. This is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 through 15. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus said. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. a hill. It cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is Jesus, the most famous teacher in human history, giving his most famous lesson, the Sermon on the Mount. And right before this, he's kind of given a description. If you are following me, these are the kinds of things that you will do. If you are serious about it, it's about loving your neighbor as yourself. If you're determined to follow Jesus, then he turns around and says, you are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world. Really great Bible scholars sometimes describe passages like this as having hyperlinks, like on Wikipedia, and you can double-click on them. And if you double-click on the hyperlink, it will take you to all of the Bible passages that Jesus has in his mind from the Old Testament, especially the book of Isaiah. We're going to walk through those hyperlinks. This is one of the passages where it shows Jesus really was intimately familiar with certain parts of the Old Testament. His mind and soul were marinating in some of these quite astounding passages, and that's what we're going to do together. We're just going to let our souls soak in some of these Old Testament passages. So there's kind of 5 themes here, 5 hyperlinks. I've tried to bold them here. And next week I'll use a larger font. Put that in the notes. Okay. Salt, trampled, light, city, and hill. These are things that are deep in the biblical imagination. And Jesus is particularly using these words to communicate something to his audience, who would have also been deeply familiar with these passages he is referencing. So here they are. Salt, trample, light, city, and mountain. These are ideas that Jesus would have said are the anchors of his teaching, when he imagined the world to be. And so let's think together, let's feel together. What was Jesus thinking when he said, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world? Salt has so many uses that anthropologists have a hard time figuring out. What was its main use in the ancient world? In fact, Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. It was highly valuable. But they settled on one conclusion, that although we think of it as flavorful, the ancient people thought of it as necessity to stay alive, that it brought life in a way that maybe nothing else did. Why? It preserved the food. But the fact that food lasted longer meant there was more food for more people, and the widespread use of salt was a major part of the Roman Empire. It's one of the reasons that they could send their army all over the place. Their food simply lasted longer. It was a wild preservative. And it turns out this was a widely known thing in the ancient world. And so in Jesus' mind, he's thinking of certain passages actually in the Hebrew scriptures where salt is used as an image for long-lasting things that last a long time. One of the things that lasted a long time were the promises that God made to us. And this is one of the primary uses of the idea of salt in the Hebrew scriptures. In fact, when God is arguing with his people, and they're worried about this, God is angry with us, God says this, don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt, that it's going to last forever? This is an image of something that is enduring. That to say you are the salt means you are part of the enduring covenant. Covenant is a strange word in our world. It means 50% promise and 50% presence. It is the combination of promise and presence, that God has promised to be with us. So when Jesus is talking about salt, he's talking about the enduring power of the covenant that Jesus promised to be here, to be with us. Trample. This always felt threatening to me as a kid, that if I am not the salt of the earth, I will be thrown out and trampled. But this is also an important hyperlink. It turns out that trampled was a key word for how the people that are hearing Jesus' Sermon on the Mount understood themselves. They identified as the ones who were trampled. Israel went through kind of a cycle of faithfulness to God when they would thrive as a nation, and then they would go worship other gods. And God would say over time, after hundreds and hundreds of years, okay, if you want to do it on your own, go for it. And inevitably, they would get trampled by the world around them. And so in the book of Daniel, Daniel has this wild dream where there are 4 beasts that roam through the land and destroy everything, and the final beast is the most terrifying of them all. And scholars tell us that this 4th beast is actually the Roman Empire that Jesus is currently living Jesus is saying you will be trampled. What the hearers are hearing is that's not a prediction, that is a present reality for them. That the Israelite nation had already been trampled by the Romans. They were an occupied territory. So Jesus isn't saying this is a threatening thing. He's saying, I know right how you are feeling right now. And one of the remarkable things about the Roman Empire doing the trampling is that Jesus also knows, well before his hearers do, that someday soon in the story in the book of Matthew, he too will be trampled for them. That he's not offering a threat to say, if you don't do this, you will be trampled. He is signaling one day, I will join you in your suffering. I too will be trampled. And it is at the beginning of the story, a wink at the end, a wink towards the end to say, when we are trampled together, we will also rise together. And this is the strange gospel promise that we do not deserve, that when we let Jesus into the places of our lives where we have been trampled, we also get to live into his resurrection power. And already Jesus is saying, this is what is on the horizon. The enduring power of the covenant and the resurrection promise right here. Do these hyperlinks. Light. Light, of course, is essential to the creation story. God said, let there be light, and there was light. This harkens back to the power of God to create all things. But there's also wordplay at work here. In Hebrew, the word is or. It's got a little bit of a tongue roll. I'm not very good at it. But also it rhymes with the word Torah. You can hear it. Torah is the word for God's instruction. We have the same association in English. That when you learn something, you have a light bulb come on. But the wordplay here of light and understanding is quite powerful. So Jesus is saying, you are the light of the world. He's referencing these powerful Hebrew scriptures. The book of Isaiah looks something like this. Now this one might be tricky to read. I'll do my best. And here we'll see the city on the hill and the mountain and the light all wrapped into one. How Jesus imagines the world to be working. What is the universe like? Isaiah chapter 2. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways that we may walk his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge rightly between the nations and settle disputes for many peoples. Check this out. What happens when they live in the light, when they listen to the instruction? Famous passages. When God is ruling all, the people stream to the hill where he speaks his righteous judgments from. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. There will be peace, no more swords, and abundance. There will be all the tools that we need to provide for the world that we live in. Plowshares. Nation will no longer take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Its light is the symbol for life-giving, peace-bringing guidance from God. Two other hyperlinks. City is an amazing thing in the Bible. When the first city is built, it is where bad things happen. It is a human invention. And it is associated with wrongdoing and the ignorance of God. But as the story develops, God gains an affinity, an affection for cities. They start as a thing where people who are gathered to ignore God are. But slowly over time in the story of the Bible, God comes to accept that's where the people made in my image are. That's where my presence will be. Such that, whereas cities are bad at the beginning, by the end in the book of Revelation, when all things are fixed and healed, Jerusalem, a city, descends down from heaven. It becomes an essential part of the story. This human invention becomes something that God uses for his own purposes to fix and heal the world. The hyperlink of city, the idea of city is that a human invention, it means that you and I get input on this plan, that we are not passive recipients. We're active participants, that the things we dream up and invent are going to be part of God's healing the world in the end. When you are a city on the hill, it is because you had great, brilliant ideas that were all your own, and you invited God into it. Cities are a human invention used for God's purposes. It's an invitation for you and I to participate. Mountains captured something quite essential, I think, to Dwell Church. See, sometimes we'll talk about it like this. There's a big discussion going on right now in biblical scholarship There was a gospel that we are all familiar with that is quite essential to understand. That Jesus died for our personal sins so that one day we might go to heaven. That is all true and powerful, the most important thing that ever happened in human history. But it is too small, even that is too small to be the gospel. The gospel is that God is present to us in whole new, wildly transformative, life-changing, palpable ways. Jesus was declaring, it is here, it is happening. When God took on human flesh, it was God's way of finally uniting with humanity, being present to us. That is the offer of the gospel, that God could saturate your life. We live in a God-saturated world. If we chose to, we could ask Jesus to teach us to live in that God-saturated world. That is the gospel. So in the ancient world, they understood this, that one day God will be fully present here. They didn't know about space and stars. They thought that was God's realm. They said the mountains were highest to the place where God is. One day when he descends, the mountains will be the first place, saturated with his presence. Mountains are holy places in Scripture because they are close to God. And you, my friends, are a city on a hill. So Jesus is marinating his mind and soul on these Scriptures. He's inviting us to understand the way he imagines the world. That the enduring covenant and the resurrection promise and God's life-giving guidance, including human invention, stuff you and I dream up, can be close to or containers of the presence of God. Now, a wild thing happens here in the way that Isaiah develops, but also in what Jesus says. So I'm going to close by reading this longer bit out of Isaiah chapter 42. As we think about this, I didn't put all of Isaiah chapter 42 on the screen because the font was too small. So you're just going to have to listen. This is a passage about how Jesus understood himself, and it's going to help us understand our function in the world. Isaiah declared on God's behalf, God speaking through Isaiah here, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not be snuffed out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice upon the earth. In his teaching the islands will put their hope. This is what the Lord God says, the creator of the heavens, who stretches out the heavens, who spreads out the earth with all that springs in it, who gives breath to its people and life to those who walk in it. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and make you to be a covenant for the people, a light for the Gentiles, to open the eyes of the blind, to free the captives from prison, to release the dungeons from those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord, that is my name." And these are passages that Jesus used to explain himself, that he is the servant in this passage. That he is the one in whom the blind can see, and the captives are released from prison. And here's what Jesus says about you and I. Not that he is out doing everything, although that is true. What he says about his coming, the power of the gospel to be present in the world, is that you are the covenant faithfulness. You are the enduring promise of God's presence upon the earth. Not that we walk in God's light, but that you are the life-giving instruction for the world. That this passage from Isaiah chapter 42, imagine Jesus to be doing those things. Jesus here says it will actually be you and I doing these things. Why does he say that? Because he is coming to dwell within us. That you are the evidence of the enduring covenant of God's presence out in the world. That you are the image of God's life-bringing light out in the world. Why? Because Jesus lives within you. That every space you set foot upon is a sacred space. You carry the blessing out into the world. There is no place you can go where you don't get to say, "Jesus, would you be present here?" And he will say, "Yes, I will." That will happen every time you pray that prayer. And here's my dream. People are statistically way more likely enduring presence of God with us. This is holy, sacred